Hi to everyone who just joined us. We're going to wait a couple of minutes and start at 12 p.m. So hang tight and welcome.
Wonderful. I am thrilled that we're going to have two fantastic individuals here with us today at the Cardiovascular Digital Health and the Franco Cardiovascular Center at University of Michigan. They don't need any introduction, but I'm going to go ahead and maybe talk a little bit about them before they get started. First, from the FDA, we have Dr. Aneesh Deoras, who is the Assistant Director for Cardiac Ablation, Mapping, and Imaging Devices in FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health. His team is responsible for cardiac electrophysiology products across the total product life cycle, from early feasibility studies to post-market adverse event trending. Aneesh also supports the CDRH efforts in digital health and artificial intelligence. And Aneesh is a graduate of Penn State University in electrical engineering and University of Pennsylvania for bioengineering. And then we have my friend and colleague from Google, Dinesh Puppala, who's the regulatory affairs lead at Google. He specializes in digital health and the generative AI, which has a lot of interest from our group. He has deep expertise in global regulations, and he champions the development of safe and effective products, particularly in the area of digital health and generative AI. Throughout his career, Dinesh has played a pivotal role in leading lots and lots of pre-market submission across the globe, and he's contributed significantly to lots of go-to-market strategy for various products. He's done collaborations with industry giants like Verily, Bard, and he's currently at Google Health, as I described. Has a master's degree from Johns Hopkins, and he has lots of industry experience that he's going to share with us. So with that, I'm going to invite Aneesh to kind of get us started. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Kambari. Really appreciate this opportunity to speak today. Can everyone see my slides? Great. Well, thank you all for this chance. I really appreciate the opportunity to share about this FDA review process. I think it's consistently something that is a little difficult to interpret and understand. And so at least just a high-level understanding of this process can, I think, really have a big impact. And we actually have numbers to this fact. So this was a recent survey done by researchers at UCSF. And to my knowledge, this is really the only survey of its kind, asking physicians, cardiologists included, how much do you understand the FDA review process for medical products, drugs and devices? Um, and to highlight, I really wanted to point out a couple numbers here in that the numbers are pretty poor. People don't feel that they have a great understanding of how this review process goes. And there's a clear difference between drugs and devices. So I think that's really attributable to the fact that for drugs, it's quite clear. There's a phase 1, 2, 3 process, there's post-market monitoring, but the device process is fairly unclear. The study also looked at potential misconceptions about how this review process works. And there were a couple of things that they highlighted, such as providers had a feeling that because a new product was approved by FDA, it must be in some way more safe or more effective than what's available on the market already, which is just not true. It's not something that is unreasonable to think. However, that's simply not what our regulations allow us to do. And so I think it's really helpful to have an understanding because not only is that misconception potentially changing what people think about FDA review processes, but if that leads to changes in what people recommend to their patients, that I think is a pretty serious question. So hopefully I can give you a good overview of how the FDA review process works, especially for cardiovascular medical devices. And then we'll talk a little bit more about digital health, which I think will help lead into Dinesh's talk a little. So I do like to start any of these talks with just a brief history of FDA and medical device regulation, because for any regulatory body, especially in the United States, there's typically some kind of precipitating event that happens and leads to a new type of legislation. And I've highlighted some of those points here. So for example, the Poison Squad in 1902, this is a group of men who met under the auspices of the USDA at the time, and they would just have dinner together, and that dinner would be laced with various food additives that were on the market. And then they would just monitor for adverse reactions. Around this time is when Upton Sinclair published The Jungle. And so in 1908, just right after, you see the first laws being passed that sort of set the underpinnings of the FDA. On the drug side, you see things like elixir sulfanilamide, which was a cough medicine that was prepared with diethylene glycol, not even as a solvent for the active ingredient. That was just to add a raspberry flavor. But in the end, that led to about 100 people dying, predominantly children who were the people taking this. And of course, thalidomide with Dr. Francis Oldham Kelsey, who was the FDA medical officer who refused to allow this on the market. And although there were certainly patients in the US who were affected by this drug, and there are many patients who are still alive today dealing with the consequences, it did highlight that FDA is able to stop these things from getting to the market. And so that led to another change. These dates are important because both of these happened well before FDA gained any specific authority to regulate medical devices. That came after other events like the Dalcon Shield, which was an intrauterine device that had a number of problems. It was widely advertised, but at the same time, the design was poor. There were things like the string attached to it would break down, lead to microbial growth, and actually septic shock and potentially death in multiple people. And that highlighted the need for, in 1976, the medical device amendments that introduced FDA's ability to regulate medical devices, excuse me. And I do want to highlight Therac 25s. There's not regulation specific to this one, but it was a radiation therapy machine that, because of a design flaw in the software, it actually allowed the radiation therapy techs to deliver massive amounts of radiation to their patients because a certain target didn't move into place. 3 people died as a result, and many patients had really severe radiation injuries as a result. And so you can see the remnants of that, the consequences of that in FDA's software policies all the way up till today. And so hopefully we can go over a few of those things. Now, this is more of a reference slide of some of the really important legislation that came through. I did want to highlight 2022, which is, I think, our most recent, most significant legislation. And what that did is Fedora added a few important things, including new requirements for cybersecurity testing and some new allowances for us to do what's called a predetermined change control plan, which is going to be an important part of FDA's artificial intelligence program going forward. And just to note, FDA is not a standalone agency within the US government. We're part of the Department of Health and Human Services, along with agencies you're likely familiar with, NIH, CDC, CMS, which is Medicare, and many others. And so we are sort of part of this whole group, and our sister agencies are people we work with very frequently. I think part of the challenge of understanding how FDA works, I wanted to map out, this is just my office of about maybe 150 people total, broken up into this group. The bolded team, that's my team of about 10 people. We have different teams for various different devices. We work with many of these other teams. So for example, my team handles intravascular ultrasound and OCT devices. We have to work with our coronary and peripheral interventional devices teams because our imaging catheters really support their coronary and peripheral stents or other interventions. So it's kind of interesting to see this. And of course, we do have contact information for each of these, and I can share that if you'd like. If you have, for some reason, you need to get in touch with us. So what does my team do? We look at 3D mapping systems like Cardo or EnSite, all ablation catheters, all diagnostic catheters, IVUS and OCT. And then we also handle a variety of other things like ICE catheters and some ancillary equipment that doesn't really have a great home. If it's something electrical, it often just comes to us. Our team is a mix of predominantly engineers, but we also have physicians, nurses, veterinarians, a wide range of expertise that's needed to look at new and modified devices, certain clinical studies that meet legislative criteria, and then of course, adverse event trending, initiating compliance actions. Really the whole product lifecycle is our responsibility. So that's just an overview of where I'm at, the structure of the FDA Cardiovascular Devices Center. I think I keep saying the word device, and I think that's important for us to define because the definition device is really important. This is a very paraphrased version, but if something doesn't meet the definition of a device, it's not going to be regulated by FDA's Center for Devices and Radiological Health. There's an asterisk to everything I say here, but for the most part, that's going to be the case. I think there's a couple things that are interesting here. So really, it's any kind of thing that's used in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease. Where this is interesting is actually this definition is identical to the drug definition, except that it adds this part, does not achieve its primary intended purpose through chemical action, and which is not dependent on being metabolized. And that leads to some really interesting consequences for certain products that we might normally think of as drugs, but are actually regulated by CDRH. And then in 2016, this extra part was added, which is not a software function excluded from the definition of a medical device. And so we'll quickly go over what those sort of exclusions are. So in the United States, unlike for drugs are typically, they all have to go through phase 1, 2, 3 studies, except unless they are generic drugs. Devices are classified into 3 categories, 1 being the lowest, 3 being the highest, and they're separated out into panels that are based on subspecialties of medicine. And so new devices are automatically under class 3 unless they can go through a certain policy that moves them into 2 or 1. So some example devices, and I think it's helpful to look at example devices because you can get a sense of what classifications these might fall under. So something like a hemostat or a surgical tool in general is typically going to be class 1. A toothbrush actually meets the definition of device, but also would be a class 1 device. A pacemaker, of course, I think you can imagine would be the highest classification, class 3. A blood pressure monitor, this moderate classification, now we're coming back down a little bit, class 2. Now the thing is, class 2 is massive. It covers a wide range of things. So here we have a robotic surgery system, that's also class 2. And it has the exact same submission pathway as a blood pressure monitor. It raises a challenge of this 3 classification system is quite hard to do. Most other countries do not do a 3 classification system, they have 4. But this is the situation we're in, that these are all the same. Of course, a heart valve, that's going to be class 3, gloves, class 1. AEDs nowadays are class 3, they used to be class 2. They went through something called up classification because of the risk. And these 2 I think are pretty interesting. So contact lens solution, that's not a drug, that's a device. And so it's a class 2 medical device. Medical maggots, oddly enough, they do it through mechanical action. I suppose there are enzymatic reactions inside the maggots themselves, but no, that is a device as well. And so we would clear that. through the same 510K pathway that blood pressure monitors and robotic surgery systems go through. So I should just quickly go over what these marketing authorization pathways look like. So of course, we have the first question, does the product meet the definition of a device? Then we have this category, we have a new or modified device. If it's class 1, which is the lowest risk, typically there's no submission. If it's class 2, normally we'll see a 510K. 510K is the most common pathway that most devices go through. There is a special pathway for devices that don't meet 510K rules called a de novo. It's used sparingly, only in cases where 510K just doesn't apply. And then PMA is the class for pacemakers, heart valves, ablation catheters. Those are the highest risk products. And also, we have an extra way if under 8,000 patients get this condition in a year, we can call it an HDE. So it's an orphan designation. That's a lower bar that we can use to make sure that these products are available. And then, of course, it doesn't stop there. There's a lot of requirements in the post-market space that companies need to follow. All of this, I do want to just highlight, you'll see advertising for different devices. The terminology is fairly important from a legal perspective. So 510K devices are cleared, de novos are granted, and PMAs are approved. And technically, you're really only supposed to advertise that you have an approved PMA, not that you have a cleared 510K. That's not really what people do, but that is what the regulations say. And so just to keep that terminology in mind, it's pretty useful, I think. So what do we do? What do we actually have authority to regulate? We do regulate, as I mentioned on the previous page, we look at certain medical devices before they're placed into interstate commerce. And then there's specific things called adulteration and misbranding. And this is often, if you see something happening legally with FDA, it's often going to be focused on adulteration or misbranding. But we don't regulate the practice of medicine, First Amendment protected speech. Interestingly, patient privacy and data protection, even though we have a lot of cybersecurity requirements. We don't do device cost and reimbursement, except in the sense that having more competition and more devices on the market might influence costs. We don't do statutes and regulations enforced by other agencies. We often have to work with FTC, SEC, DOJ, because they have different things that they can enforce. And of course, things that don't meet the definition of a device, that's a pretty quick answer. What do we look at when we look at these things? We have a large range of bench testing, mostly defined in consensus standards set by ISO, IEC, ANSI, AAMI. These are main standards bodies that define how this testing is done, and then we'll provide additional guidance to people how you should do this kind of testing. We also look at clinical testing, depending on the type of application, animal testing if we really need it. There's a lot that goes into a review. And so I think it's helpful to see the typical pathway for a class 3 device. This would be a heart valve. This would be an ablation catheter. There's a lot of steps going through this process. There's many interactions with FDA early in the process for pre-submission meetings. People will normally move into bench and animal testing after that because they'll get our feedback on how to run those tests. We often see feasibility or early feasibility studies. This is sort of a phase 1 or maybe a phase 2 study, but we call it feasibility. And early feasibility, if it's very early, we're anticipating changes to the device over the course of the study. We'll see a pivotal study, that's our class 3 equivalent, our phase 3 equivalent. PMA submission, it's 180 days. It's a pretty fixed timeline unless we put it on hold because we need more information. We do sometimes, but not always, inspect clinical and manufacturing sites to make sure that the data we're receiving are correct, that the devices are being manufactured properly. Sometimes if it's a new product, we will call an advisory panel. So that's a group of physicians who have volunteered to be part of FDA's advisory panel, and they will help provide guidance on whether or not to approve something. Then you have PMA approval, and then that doesn't end there. So we have post-approval studies, post-market surveillance, and further reports and supplements. And the basis is a reasonable assurance for safety and effectiveness. That is the standard for a class 3 device. Not that it's better than other things that are on the market, just that it by itself is supported by reasonable assurance. The process for a 510K is much simpler. The entire basis is something substantially equivalent to a predicate device. And that predicate device had to have been on the market before the laws for medical devices came into place in 1976. But it also can stack. So something that was found substantially equivalent can be used itself as a predicate. And so that's led to pretty significant creep. And so most products robotic surgery systems certainly didn't exist before 1976, at least not in the form they are now, but they can still go through the 510K pathway because you have that progression in the 510K process. It is the most common pathway. It's fairly quick, 90 days for FDA's clock to review, and that's a strict clock. Now, we often can put it on hold, submission on hold to ask questions, but it is a very quick review, and there is not a guarantee that clinical testing, especially randomized clinical testing, would be performed. So let's jump into digital health. Obviously, there's a lot of excitement about digital health opportunities, and cardiovascular is certainly an area, a hotbed for innovation. And I've been really excited to be part of that. We're seeing artificial intelligence be used in echocardiography, in AR, VR, even in the EP space. But digital health is pretty broad. We would say something like Da Vinci as a surgery system would still be digital health because it's doing something digitally. It's a computerized system. This is an extremely broad field when we say digital health. One of the biggest things I think is important is that certain digital health products are excluded from the definition of a device. And the motivation is pretty clear in my opinion. So let's take an elliptical. Many of us have spent years staring at these things. And they do have a readout here for your heart rate. It's read from electrical biopotentials on the surface of your skin. It counts the RO peaks or however their algorithm works, and it spits out a number. But how different is that from, this is one of GE's newest monitors. It's doing the same thing. It's using ECG leads to calculate a patient's heart rate, and it outputs that number. So there's got to be a line between there defining what is or is not a device, because I think for most people, they would not really care so much if this is regulated. They would care if this is regulated. And so we need, and Congress had to face this question, we need some way of defining what is or is not a device. So the things that are exempted, and these are very clear exemptions in the statute. We have separate guidances that help elaborate these things. But things like transferring, storing, converting formats, not a device. So of course, things like Verizon's communication systems are not devices simply because medical data moves through their pipes. General wellness, we mentioned that for the heart rate with exercise. Electronic health records very clearly are not devices. However, those EHR systems do incorporate algorithms that might themselves be considered devices. So we would look at that algorithm specifically. Clinical decision support, we do have a guidance explaining this. There's certain requirements we would want to see and that are set in law about how transparent it is to the user about understanding why it recommended something. That's a very complex topic, so I would recommend reading their guidance. It's pretty short and very useful to understand. There are other things that we've separately decided are under enforcement discretion. We're not going to regulate. So things like helping patients self-manage their conditions, automating tasks. It's not obvious if they do or do not meet the definition, but the point here is that these are probably low-risk things that don't need FDA review prior to being introduced. So we have a lot of guidance documents. FDA's main thing is guidance documents. That's how, aside from regulations, this is how we announce to the public, this is what we're doing. There's usually a comment period for these kinds of things. There's a ton to look at, but if you are facing a question, I would check out FDA's guidance document webpage because there's a lot of really useful information, sometimes very specific to certain devices. So we even have a guidance specific to catheter ablation devices for AFib. So it's pretty useful to check out. We also have a terminology called function, and this represents a function-based approach that has defined a lot of our digital health strategy. So we look at specific functions of a device, and we consider the specific risks associated with those functions. So for example, if we have a patient monitor, the arrhythmia analysis function is a very high-risk product and something we would want to regulate and we would want to see in a pre-market setting before release to the market. Long-term trending of patient parameters. Of course, there is some risk associated with this. If you think that a patient did not have QT prolongation, and so you skip that patient and decide to release them, you might miss a potential serious adverse event. But it's a lower risk thing, of course, than immediate arrhythmia analysis functions. And then transferring to a health record, that's a much lower risk function. And all of these functions, though, can coexist on the same system, same patient monitor and same backend system. So what we do consider in this case is that we have a multiple function device product, and that we have, say, a higher risk product that would be regulated and a low risk function that would not be regulated. And so we will consider the impact. So say there are effects from this transferring to health record function on, okay, it causes all other operations on the monitor to pause, and so arrhythmia analysis shuts down. That would be a pretty negative impact that we would want to understand in the pre-market review phase. We also have a lot of discussion lately about digital health technologies in clinical studies, use of different sensors, applications, wearable products to help collect data from patients in ways that was not previously possible. The wording we use for this commonly, we do have a guidance, of course, it was recently finalized. We say fit for purpose very commonly when we talk about digital health technologies. We want to look at the clinical trial population, the performance specifications. There are unique considerations if, say, a patient needs to provide their own smartwatch in order to participate in a study. And then, of course, the algorithms that are processing the data that come out of these DHTs. We want to make sure that they are appropriate for the patient population at hand and that we can interpret the results when they come back. But we are very supportive of this because there's a lot of opportunities to improve diversity of patients, reduce burden on patients for participating in studies. It's really exciting to see how things are moving. A couple of considerations here for an AF study, how a digital health app would work here. I'm going to jump forward just to keep on time. And of course, we should talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning. We have authorized a number of AI/ML devices. I believe we are over 700 at this point. In cardiology, we're seeing ECG and EGM analysis, which has long been a machine learning-based tool, but also guidance for acquiring a good echocardiogram, analysis of heart sounds, even artificial intelligence tools that help you place an LAA occluder and choose the right size for that patient. There's a lot of really exciting stuff happening, and these things are already cleared and on the market. So we have, I believe, 700. This chart I generated maybe last year. If you can't really see, I think it's quite small, but most AI ML based devices are coming through radiology, which is understandable. But cardiology, we're a distant second, but we have a lot coming through. One of the terminologies that I think is going to be important is called the Predetermined Change Control Plan, or PCCP. And the idea being that we can clear a device with a plan to evolve. And so that will hopefully allow us to capture the benefits of AI in training on new data and adapting to a specific patient population at a single site. I really recommend looking out for this. We're going to try and make sure that these devices are very clear when they have a PCCP. And I think that's going to be a major part of our AI ML strategy going forward. A couple of useful resources. So there's I would Google these things, Mobile Health Interactive Tool. This is a cross-agency effort to highlight what rules might apply if you're developing a mobile app, not just FDA, but also FTC and Health and Human Services, which has a couple of things. So HIPAA and electronic health records, whether those come into consideration. And then I'd highlighted maybe 7 different guidances that relate to, is something a device or not? You can just check out our Digital Health Policy Navigator. It's not perfect, but it will get you very far in understanding whether something you're looking at is or is not a medical device. People really love this feature, so if you get a chance, I would check it out. It's pretty useful to look at. Of course, if you have questions, there's informal ways to ask questions. There's formal ways to ask questions. Feel free to contact me if you have anything if you're really not sure where to go, I can hopefully point you in the right direction. But overall, thank you all for this chance to speak today, and I really am looking forward to Dinesh's talk as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aneesh. That was wonderful. I think we would like to transition to Dinesh's talk now, and then we will leave the questions at the end.
Thank you, Hamid. Hope everybody can see my slides. My name is Dinesh. I'm part of the regulatory affairs team at Google. We try to bring innovative medtech products into the market. including wearable and digital health products. This is a great opportunity to share the industry perspective of what it takes to bring a medical device to the market, especially being a part of a tech company and not a traditional medical device company. I think the agency serves as a treasure trove of resources. I think I should say FDA is one of the forefront agencies to put out guidelines and also standards around what is required to bring especially innovative digital health products to the market. And the FDA's involvement and open collaboration has led to bringing a lot of novel AI and ML devices to the market. So also I wanted to share a little bit of what it takes to develop a medical device. I've also highlighted where regulatory and compliance comes in. But as a part of the industry, a lot of things are happening in parallel. So developing a medical device, different parts of a sponsor are doing different things. So there's also like R&D, which is supporting developing like unique IP for your product. There's also product development, which is like trying to productize your IP into an actual product. While risk management, the quality function of your industry is doing like risk analysis and other design quality management system, which is required to bring the product globally out. And if it's a hardware product or a software product, like this manufacturing and software development, also UX and usability are supposed to parallelly do like usability and other testing. So all of this, like the regulatory professionals, like usually regulatory specialists or regulatory managers or regulatory leads, are the liaisons of taking all of this information, compiling it, and submitting it to the agencies globally. But also one key function, especially in the industry, is the regulatory professionals do a lot of regulatory strategy. So we are involved from the beginning of the development of a product, working side by side with the engineers and cross-functional teams to inform what it actually takes to bring a product to the market in a compliant, safe, and effective manner. So we are informing what it's like to bring a product to the market. Like everybody wants to bring the market soon to the market, but like a comprehensive evaluation of what the different regulatory pathways available are, the requirements, the potential risks, and also the cost. It's like the goal of a regulatory strategy is to determine the appropriate classification, testing, documentation, and everything else required to bring this product successfully to the market. So also a regulatory professional understands the applicable regulations, guidelines, and also what's the right fit for your product. There might be an amazing idea, but it might take a lot of time to bring to market based on what it's trying to achieve. So a regulatory professional with the required engineering cross-functional stakeholders should try to map and like align on the goals of the product. And also understand what the precedents are, like also understanding the competitive landscape, the potential hurdles, and what's going on in the post-market space regarding complaints so that you can learn from your competitors. And also as a regulatory professional, you have to stay updated on the evolving regulations and industry shift so that like the product stays state of the art. So I've just shared some examples of how these look. I think like Aneesh also shared, some of the medical device development happens by modification. So it's not only new product introduction, but also like changes to existing medical devices lead to new medical products. So FDA has amazing guidelines around when to submit a new 510(k), which have like flow charts and like examples of change assessments I wanted to point out, which could be a great resource while creating documentation. But a good regulatory strategy document should include these key sections, which could drive the team towards like key deliverables required for the successful product launch. So usually when collaborating with other stakeholders, understanding the guidelines required and the ultimate work output, we try to ask the questions to get out of like the engineering team or the research team, what the device or the product we are developing is intended for. And that translates to the intended use, which is the primary purpose of the device that serves. And also the indications for use, the terminology for what condition or populations the product is targeting. And also the underlying technology, like the principle of operations, the sensors being used, or the algorithm calculations happening. And also like a risk assessment to understand what's the safety concerns of this product when we bring to this market, what the users would experience, such as potential hazards. And also understanding of the competitor landscape. This would help with the regulatory strategy in understanding if this really requires a de novo pathway or an existing predicate device or a competitor device would help serve as like a predicate device to bring it as a substantial equivalence device. And also understanding the relevant industry standards available is key to understanding what testing requirements need to be met before bringing the product to market. And like ultimately you want to get to a stage where you are able to classify the product. So the initial assessment of the device risk-based and also the intended use of the predicate device could help you lead with this. And also the starting point of classifying your product would be to look at the medical device definition. I won't read the medical device definition, but as Aneesh mentioned, like it's very clear and laid out from the regulation, the medical device definition from the US FDA. So what you're looking at is the intended use and the indications for use to understand if this device actually has a medical purpose and fits within the scope of the existing regulatory scope. So also the claims and marketing materials, depending on the business needs, we can understand if this product is a medical device. So is it intended to diagnose, treat, or mitigate a disease? This is subject to strict FDA regulation. But like there are also in the product, especially in the realm of digital health, there are wellness devices. I think Aneesh gave an amazing example, but another example would be the context of use is really important. Say like a pulse oximeter. So if being used in the environment of like clinical environment for making like judgments on the product, on the user's health, it is considered a medical device. But if you look at like for recreational use, if you're using it for hiking purposes, like SpO2 on wellness devices is available as wellness devices. And also some products which are on the borderline are called enforcement discretion. These products are low risk that the FDA does not want to regulate such products, although these do meet the definition of medical device. And all other products which are not regulated by the FDA fall out of the scope of medical device regulation. And also a key question I get is what's the difference between a software as a medical device and a software in a medical device? Firstly, both are regulated as medical devices, but software as a medical device is a standalone software. So it's not functioning as part of the hardware and also is not controlling any piece of the hardware. It is independently able to, like ideally in a stage would be agnostic of the hardware and should be able to run on pre-specified hardware. Example would be like any mobile medical app. Also, software in a medical device is more like the traditional medical device, which is part of the hardware medical device and powers the mechanics or the outputs of the medical device. And examples would be software which control insulin pumps or software inside pacemakers or blood pressure cuffs. And I think like some of this might be repetitive, but I do want to make my point is like FDA has a lot of resources, especially for product classification that we use a lot in the industry. We are actually like always monitoring the FDA's website, setting up alerts to understand what new rules are being made and also what other products are being listed. And there are a lot of like specialties, especially like 16 grouping specialties under which medical devices are classified. So once you understand your product is a medical device, definitely FDA's existing databases would serve as the first step in understanding if there is an existing regulation or a product code covering your product definition. So finding an FDA product code which is relevant to your product is the usual first step. And I've listed the sources of the medical device databases available, which would allow you to find the key classification details of your proposed product. And like within cardiovascular as well, there are like already established 446 broad definitions of medical devices. So you can find here like everything from CPR devices to ECG devices to EP devices, ablation devices, which do help you navigate with the next steps of if your product already has an existing regulation and framework. And also usually in the regulation, there is something called special controls, which detail the controls FDA has established for other products meeting the definition of your product and the prerequisites they are looking for in your regulatory submission. That helps understand if a product actually is a candidate for a 510(k) submission. So other databases, not only the product classification databases we use, would be like the 510(k) database, the de novo database, which we understand there is like rules being made around the product definition we are also targeting. But similarly, another slide would be once you understand, yes, my product is a medical device, the risk translate to the submission types. So low risk devices, same examples like toothbrushes are also medical devices, but lower class, whereas like a defibrillator would be like a class 3. And like most devices are class 2 under the FDA and usually require a 510(k). And these are not set requirements and could be depending on nuance, could change in the submission types. But what does the industry use to understand the type of submission, the type of testing required is like the pre-submission process. But I've also flagged other types of submissions available with the agency to get a lot of information, such as the 513G request for information. So industry leverages this request for information available with the agency to submit like your device description, your product claims, possible product labeling. If you're not able to yourself navigate and understand if your product falls into a particular classification, you could submit this classification request and get an feedback from the agency even before you move along to further develop your product or even like conduct like expensive clinical studies. If you're unsure about your product classification, you could use such requests to understand the classification of your product. And a Q submission, also called the pre-submission process with the FDA, allows for the sponsor to meet with the FDA and also get written feedback from the FDA before you submit your actual regulatory submission. This is an optional process, but the industry leverages this process a lot. I think the statistics I've seen is like a lot of in the thousands that each year industry sponsors exchange written feedback with the FDA to understand the requirements and also get an understanding if the FDA review team aligns with your regulatory strategy you have formed before developing your product. And the 510(k) and PMA not cover, but like would be the typical processes to get like clearance and like approval process through the 510(k), through the FDA process. Whereas de novo classification is for products which have no predicates and are novel devices. A little bit more about the pre-submission process is like pre-submissions can be very strategic and also can like if you are trying to like optimize resources, especially for a de novo submission where there is no predicate device available, pre-submissions help facilitate FDA feedback. And also the key controls you set up based on your experience and also the target population you're trying to target. You can exchange information such as what you're expecting to study on the bench and also in the clinical study, especially around sample size, endpoints, and everything else can be shared as part of the pre-sub. The timing of the pre-sub is also something I wanted to touch on. Like after the design of the prototype and the intended use are established, usually a pre-submission is timed to get like the proposed feedback, which you can incorporate before the clinical study is kicked off. I have like other slides related to the actually navigating the submission process. So like I said, pre-submission is optional, but like if you decided like for an example, if our proposed product is a class 2, which has like a predicate device available, you would next navigate through doing all the required testing as mentioned in your special controls and prepare a 510(k) submission. And like the new format FDA is using is called the E-Star format. And also using like the CDRH portal, you will electronically submit the 510(k). And I think like Aneesh also touched upon the review clock. But like just for especially to your other stakeholders, you need to explain that this review clock is just like the approximate time which the review team takes to review your application. But definitely there are usually sometimes holds for additional information. Before the E-Star process, there was something called the refuse to accept from the FDA. So actually, a lot of usually up to 40% of the first time 510(k) submissions get put on hold before being accepted. And this, I think, like is being mitigated a lot by this E-Star template. But still, there is like an administrative review process for the first 15 days to make sure that all of the responses are accurate and also the relevant resources are included in the E-Star template. So they assess the completeness of the E-Star format, and then it moves to the substantive review. Although this is like a new process by the FDA, I think this has streamlined a lot of the 510(k) submission process further. And to manage expectations, especially with the executives and also the launch life cycle, we want to make sure like the review clock is well understood by all the stakeholders. Although the typical review time is already established from the FDA, there could be extended delays if additional information requests are required. And also sometimes if additional testing is required based on the review team's request, your submission could take longer. And this is similar to a football game where the review clock stops each time the play stops. But I know there's a lot of interest in the AI and ML medical devices. And like I wanted to touch upon that, and especially the PCCP. I think like because of software as medical device, the development life cycles are so quick and so fast because like unlike like traditional medical devices, when the changes are limited for a software medical devices, especially in the AI and ML space, you would want to see a plan where changes are possible. So for this, I think the unique approach from the FDA around PCCP is really valuable. Where like when you're developing the device itself, if you understand the life cycle of your product, where you understand the next possible change for this product is more like expanding the indications for use or other things, you can mention that as part of your PCCP plan. That way you can get like an understanding of the clear deliverables required before you can make that change. Hamid, I want to make sure how are we on time?
I think we're good. Maybe I think we're good on time. Yeah. So if you wanted to complete your talk and then we'll have some questions.
Okay. Yeah. The only few things I wanted to mention is like many stakeholders think once it's submitted, it's ready for launch. There's also something like required for post submission. So say you've submitted a 510(k) and satisfied all the requests from the agency review team. There is also, after the clearance, there is a lot of like work required before you can launch your product, especially related to labeling, especially related to manufacturing, if there are any required, and also making sure you have an established system for monitoring your device performance and safety after launch. This is usually referred to as post-market surveillance. So this establishes as a system that you're able to capture all your complaints and address them if there are any trends you're observing. I think with that, I'll pause and like we'll be open to questions.
That's so good. Thank you so much, both of you, for such an insightful introduction to the work that you do every day. I would have to say, from a personal experience, before I had my first meeting with the FDA, I was like really scared, and I had heard all these, horror stories about the FDA. And I have to say that my biggest takeaway from my first few initial encounters with the FDA was that everybody there really wants to help you, and everybody there is pretty insightful. So, if you have any questions, reaching out to the FDA is really always a great idea, and they're super helpful. And they have wonderful people there. And from like always working with the industry, it's just a lot of thoughtful people on the other side also trying to do the right thing for patients. So I think if you have questions, always reach out to Aneesh and his group, and they're always happy to answer. I have a question. Maybe there's a lot of questions in the chat, but I also wanted to maybe start off with one question. Particularly, that question is regarding Class 2 medical devices. Can you talk a little bit about the different requirements for clinical evidence for prescription versus over-the-counter? Class 2, particularly wearable devices, and how much of that decision is based on, clinical studies versus human factor testing? And then maybe Dinesh, you can also comment a little bit about how, from an industry perspective, how you're thinking about not only the go-to-market strategy of prescription versus over-the-counter, and also how you're building evidence for supporting that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting area. So I think the difference between prescription and over-the-counter, actually by default, all devices are supposed to be written for a layperson, so they're supposed to be over-the-counter. The addition of prescription use is really a limitation that it would not be expected that the layperson could really interpret this unless they had, of course, a clinical education expected of a nurse or a physician. And so then we apply the limitation of a prescription use device. So it's not so much that prescription use devices work better, it's actually that the benefits and risks of the product really need the supervision of a physician in order to be used properly. And so we would look for, it's in some cases more clinical data might be needed for something that would be over the counter, because we would really want to make sure that it works for that patient population, and coupled with human factors data to make sure that people can interpret what's being said. An example scenario is if you look at the Apple Watch and its ECG function, it's very, very clear right on that front page that this does not diagnose heart attacks. And that was part of a potential concern that came up during human factors testing of, hey, what are we supposed to do with this if people misinterpret what this output says? And so, yeah, it all factors in. The need for clinical testing can potentially go up, I guess is what I want to say, for an OTC device, because we want to make sure that it works for that patient population. We understand how the failure modes look and what mitigations we need for that. I hope that was helpful.
Just to add to that, I think like I agree, working with the agency, especially with consumer wearable hardware, utilizing those sensors for SAMD products, we've understood that although like the target audience would be to be like OTC and like be available to all users without a prescription, I think there's a sense of over-reliance, especially from digital health products. I think the example Aneesh mentioned, like ECG, we do have to have disclaimers to not change any medications, because there is like alarming the end user to change their medication or like their clinical workflow based on like a screening product. It has to be clear, like many of the digital health products we are bringing to market are in like upstream of the process, which require like further evaluation by a secondary product before making any decision. So it's clear that user experience should be well evaluated. And also one experience I had while working on the study watch was also the FDA's concern on urban versus suburban populations, on understanding how they could interpret results and also ease of use of the product. So like for a product like opioid detection, it's a clear prescription product because the audience is so niche, and the alarm or the output of the product needs to go to an audience before they can receive care. So understanding what your product is trying to do and the target audience would clearly help us understand if this is a OTC or a prescription product.
That's fantastic. Can to follow that up, Aneesh and Dinesh, can you comment a little bit about what is the your view of including minorities and diversity in clinical trials as you're submitting an application to the FDA, and then how you go about like designing your study to make sure that you meet those criteria that the FDA is looking for?
Yeah, this is an extremely important thing for us. And I think in cardiovascular medicine and cardiovascular clinical trials, we've really struggled to get away from a very narrow population of slightly over middle-aged white men. And we're really missing a massive group of patients that are expected to be treated with the devices we're approving. In some cases, I guess you could argue that it maybe doesn't have an effect, but in most cases, it's something we are really interested in seeing, that sponsors proactively look to diversify their patient populations. One of the things that's coming soon, and alongside that predetermined change control plan legislation, was also something called a diversity action plan. Those technically haven't taken effect yet, but we've seen some manufacturers already start working on that and submitting it. The idea being, for any clinical study, we need a plan to make sure that the patients enrolled are diverse and represent the US population. We have an amazingly diverse population in the country. We need to make sure that these products work for all patients. And if for some reason we end up with data that just don't do that, we are leveraging other means. So real world evidence and post-approval studies are ways we can really ensure that we have a diverse population studied for every device.
But to be clear, you're not asking them to be powered for your primary endpoint for every population.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever seen that, at least in my group. I'm sure that there could be a scenario where that would be needed. That's a really interesting question. I think most manufacturers would probably balk at that, but it's something I would like to see. I don't know if we'll make it happen.
Yeah, so to comment on that, definitely manufacturers, when we are planning our clinical study, do want like a very diverse enrollment criteria. But to be honest, it is definitely hard. So we are like trying with this remote clinical trials, trying to go to remote areas, trying to enroll a lot of remote diversity and minorities in our clinical trials. Especially, we understand there are limitations of optical sensors, especially in darker skin tones. So we welcome FDA's guidelines to ensure there is like enrollment diversity in your clinical trials. But like Aneesh mentioned, like sometimes it is challenging. So we try to use other methods to evaluate. So I think like Google also worked closely to develop the monk skin tone, uh, which is used in all of our clinical trial enrollment criteria to make sure we are enrolling a diverse population and evaluate our products, not only for like age, skin tone, ethical diversity, but racial diversity, and also like geographical diversity. We are working with CROs to definitely improve those target areas because we want our products to be available and be working equally well in all populations, especially with using machine learning applications. There is a bias. If you train your model on like a certain population, you expect really good results in that population if you use them for your validation data. That's why we need to ensure we have those data very unique to make sure our product actually works well in the real world.
Thank you. We have some time, maybe answer some of the questions in the chat. Jean, do you want to ask that question yourself, or I can just ask it?
Sure, I can ask. Hi, Dr. Deoras. At what point should an academic research and development team be expected to follow all of the quality system and design control regulations found under 21 CFR Part 820?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's very specific. I was trying to find the reference that I could offer you, but there is a point at which design controls start, and that the date that happens is something FDA investigators and our review teams, when we look at quality system information, we would want to know. Because at that point, it's a decision of, not all R&D is under design controls. That would be pretty burdensome. But at some point, design controls do need to take place to make sure that requirements of the patient are being recorded and making sure that they're being met by the design throughout that process. So I don't think I could give a specific date or time of when that should happen, more that it's really important to record the date that it happens. So that way it's clear to everyone.
Generally, should it be before IDE submission, or can it be later in development?
Before IDE would be good, because normally IDEs are subject to design controls, not the quality system regs and manufacturing regs, but design controls. So that's worth thinking about.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We might have time for one more question. Ignacio, if you want to ask that question.
Yeah, hi, sorry. Well, the question is about in silico tests and if they could be useful as part of the submission of the device, let's say the surgical instrument for heart valve that I previously asked about.
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of in silico tests. We always have a goal to reduce the amount of animals used in testing, which is typically where people would go for something like that. Yeah, I think we do have a recent guidance on computational modeling and what kinds of validation we would want to see before it's used in supporting a submission. So I would just Google that and check out what's available, because it's a really interesting guidance and it might help you move forward.
Thank you so much.
Well, coming at the end of our time, I want to thank you again for taking the time from your very, very busy schedules and spending the lunchtime with us. This was very informative. Please, anybody on this call who wants to reach out to the FDA, don't be scared. They're very friendly. Please, we'll look forward to having you again very soon.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.